Okay, so I'm sitting here practicing Corcovado, the tune Corcovado by Jobim, bossa nova jazz standard, I guess you could call it. It has diminished chords in them, and there is some confusion what scale to use over a diminished chord. I remember specifically playing this tune in my first jazz ensemble in high school, and the other guitar player there asked me, what do you play over that chord? The G sharp diminished. I don't know what scale to play over it, and I had no idea. I didn't know what to tell him. But today I think I have a better idea of what to play over that chord. So I wanted to share some thoughts on this with you. Diminished chords are funny because they're often overlooked in jazz theory. The books tell you what scale you use over a minor chord and an altered chord and every kind of dominant chord, right? But they often leave out diminished chords, which is weird because then you open up your real book and every other chord is a diminished chord. So you need to know what to do over those. And the obvious choice would be the diminished scale. So the diminished scale, hopefully you are aware of that, and it's a scale consisting of whole steps and half steps alternating. So whole step, half step, whole step, half step. And there is a PDF that you can download for this lesson so you can see what it looks like. And so the first example is the diminished scale from G sharp. Makes sense, right? A diminished chord, you play the diminished scale. So let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, so sounds pretty hip, and what you need to know about diminished chords is that they have three different functions, so they can have three different functions. The most common, I think anyway, I'm pretty sure, the most common function of a diminished chord is one of a dominant. So it's leading somewhere. And in this case, we're starting on A minor. Then you hear this. Obviously that sound wants to go back to A minor. So it's actually an E7. It's functioning as an E7. Then the next chord is not A minor, but that doesn't matter. It's still functioning as a dominant that leads back to its tonic. So in my mind, that definitely wants to go back there. That means that I can play the scale that I normally would play over an E7 in A minor, which is A harmonic minor starting on E, which is the next example. So I'm playing A harmonic minor starting on E, and I'm thinking of the chord as an E7, not thinking of it as a G diminished anymore. And let's see what that sounds like. Okay, that in my mind sounds even more natural. It sounds like the obvious choice. So let's go back again and look at the G sharp diminished scale. And if you look on the PDF, you'll see that I circled two of the notes that are not within the key, because this tune is in a C major or A minor. It ends on C major, because you could argue that it's in A minor. Doesn't matter, it's the same thing, right? And if you play the diminished scale, you're playing two notes, the B flat or A sharp and the C sharp, and those notes do not belong in this key, so it's a little bit outside. So if I fix those two notes and I make them diatonic, so I lower the A sharp to an A and I lower the C sharp to C, then I actually get the other scale, which was an A harmonic minor starting on E, but I also add the G. Instead of so only two notes are different, okay? And this is a little bit more old school, I think. And the diminished scale sounds more modern and hip. But sometimes you don't want to sound like modern and hip, because every student that goes to jazz college, they learn this diminished scale and they learn the patterns. I'll show you some example of patterns. That can be really cool and effective, but it can also sound contrived, and it can sound like you just went to music school. So I think that learning the other scales, the more old school scale, it gives you a little bit more sophistication. Because you might think, well, what does it matter? Only two notes are different. But it's in the details, that's where the difference is, you know. And I've had teachers who work on this and they play these scales, and so why shouldn't I? Moving on. After the G sharp diminished, we have a G minor, C7, F diminished to F major. So it's a 2-5 to an F major. We're leaving the key of A minor for a second and playing a 2-5 to F. But instead of going to F, we're playing a diminished chord and resolving it to an F major. And that's the second most common, or I shouldn't say that, but it's the second function a diminished chord can have, as a tonic. And you could actually not resolve it. You could stay on the F. It's more of a modern sound, right? But you don't see that in old tunes too much. But in modern tunes, you can totally see that. So the melody note is an E. So if I play a diminished chord with an E, I get this chord, F diminished major 7. So again, the scale, the obvious scale, would be diminished here, right? So F diminished, let's see what that sounds like. Okay, sounds pretty good, but again, we have a problem. We have one note that does not belong in the key, which is the C sharp or D flat. So let's fix that. Let's lower that note and make it a C natural. Weird, you think, because the C is the 5th of F and we're playing a diminished chord. But you'll see that that works. The only name I can come up with for the scale in that we just created would be an E altered scale with an added natural 5th. And saxophone legend Pat LaBarbera showed me this scale. And he called it that. And that's how he derived this scale. So instead of going, let me see here. I'm now going. Just a one note difference. So let's see what that sounds like. next thing you can do is that you leave out the B flat. You don't need it. Then you get a scale that you could call F Lydian minor. So it's an F Lydian scale with a minor third. And that's actually derived from a C harmonic major scale. So I hope I'm not losing you here. C harmonic major sounds like this, right? It's a C major scale, but with a lowered sixth, so A flat. And you might say, well, I've never heard of this scale and it's weird and I'm just making this up, but it's mentioned in jazz theory and it's used. There's this book called The Lydian Chromatic Concept or something by George Russell. He talks about these scales, the diminished minor, and why not? It's a pretty cool sound, I think. Kind of oriental sounding, so let's try that. Over the F, that is. Okay, so the third situation that you'll find a diminished chord is in or as a passing chord. You'll often hear this. E minor, E flat diminished, G. For example, in Body and Soul, right? So D minor, G, E minor, D sharp diminished, D, 7, minor 7. Okay, that's very common. When that happens, it is the same thing as if the tonic were diminished, right? So C diminished, since it's symmetrical, it's the same as E flat. So the scales I just showed you over the tonic would work over that same chord. So if we have E minor, E flat diminished, you would use the same scales, and I wrote it there. So it's a B altered with a natural 5. So or G harmonic major. So E minor, Phrygian, right? E flat diminished, G harmonic major, and then D Dorian on the D, and mixo or whatever on the G7. Okay, makes sense. Obviously, you could use the diminished scale there too. That works great. Just one more thing. Sometimes you'll have a dominant chord in the key of A minor, for example. E7, right? But there's still the tonic in the bass. In classical music, you hear this all the time. That's still an E7, right? So don't get that confused with the tonic diminished situation. That's a different thing. So in tunes like You Must Believe in Spring, that's just still a dominant function. It's not a tonic, so I hope I didn't confuse you there. Another thing that might confuse you is that you might look at this tune, Corcovado, and say, well, A minor to G sharp diminished to G minor, that's the same as E minor, E flat diminished, and D minor, right? But it actually is not, because the tune establishes an A minor tonality, and then the D sharp diminished. You're still hearing A minor. Then this chord, that's where the modulation is happening. So it's not the same as going, you know, because here you clearly hear this as the key of C. So I hope that I didn't confuse things too much. It is a little bit tricky, but look at the PDF, and if there's anything you're confused about, you can feel free to send me an email or whatever and ask me what the hell I'm talking about. And I hope this gives you some ideas on how to work on diminished chords. All right, peace.